All right. Welcome to this week's episode of the Charger Podcast. I'm joined today by Mr. Wood, and we will be talking about the football team today. So, how are you doing today, Mr. Wood?
I'm doing pretty well. I've had my coffee already this morning. I'm in the middle of round number 7, probably. Feeling okay.
Yeah, sounds pretty good. So, what are your first impressions on the football team so far this year?
First impressions of the football team. Well, we've seen a couple different things, and some of these we anticipated seeing, and some of these are a little bit of a surprise. For example, we've seen defensively, we have seen a really great showing by the front 7 of the Chargers. Now, we knew we had a lot of studs coming back. We had Dylan Bennett coming back, and you had in the secondary some of the kids who'd played quite a bit before coming back. So we knew coming into the season that we're going to have a lot of returners. But some of the folks that have stepped up and to kind of accent and to help facilitate the success of those guys have really been impressive. You look at Max Wired. Max Wired is a guy who struggled with some injuries in his past, and knock on wood, he's been really great so far health-wise. Nicked up a little bit here and there, but Max played, in particular that last game against Dwanger. Man, Max had one heck of a game. And a lot of that was brought to fruition because of the line in front of me. Talk about Royce on the outside and Pasetsky up in the middle. Those are guys that are taking on double teams. I think Royce, pretty much every play this last game against Dwanger was double teamed.
Yeah.
And then Ashton too as well up in the middle. And so when that happens, you get 2 linemen on the defensive line, and so linebackers are free to roam, free to play.
Right.
And Max had a really great game because that Solomon Oduma is coming on really well. Julian Rittendine, we'll get that. You're going to edit that out of the podcast, right?
Yeah, we'll get that.
Julian, we'll just say Julian. Julian's playing really well at outside linebacker, and so you've just got Will Jeffries coming in there playing really. It's a sophomore. You never quite know how a sophomore is going to come into a defense like that, but he's played really well, especially that last game against Dwanger. And so we've really seen a lot of great things out of that defense. It's been dominant. It's been, from what we can tell, the best defense in the SAC right now. Statistically, I'm sure it's up there, but just in the games that we've seen, holding opponent, and you'll see the defense as well. It bends and doesn't break. Look at drive. But about the 30, 35, that's where they really tighten up, and you've seen them shut a lot of offenses down at that point. So a lot of great things out of them. And then on the flip side of that, on the ball, just the offensive backfield has been phenomenal. They've played really, really well, especially for sophomores. Quarterback, running back positions. It's just been really impressive out of those guys.
So, is there anything that necessarily surprised you about this team, or are they exceeding expectations from what you had going into the season?
Yeah, I thought we would struggle a little bit more on offense, especially early on, and I think we saw a little bit of that first half against Lures, but that's the first game of the season, right?
You expect.
And so just the efficiency that Jimmy Sullivan is able to run the offense with has been very impressive. He's been able to make good reads and good choices when to tuck, when to throw it away, and 2, when he throws it away, it's like away.
Yeah.
It's not close, and if there's a ball in the back of the end zone, it's up, it's high. The only one who could possibly get it is a Carroll wide receiver.
Yeah.
And so he puts the ball when he gets rid of it, or when it's a 50-50 shot, he puts it in really good spots. And so that, to me, his play in particular has been a pleasant surprise. You talk about the running back Starks. We knew what we were getting there. You knew he was going to be tough, and he was going to be shifty, and he's going to be fast. So that's not a total surprise. It's been good to see that it's carried over. But the big surprise for me, and maybe not a surprise, but just a question mark, like how is the sophomore coming in? How is he going to play? It's been great. Really, really impressive.
So, going back to what you said on the defense.
Okay.
How did you see the defense being as good as they were this year?
There's definitely potential. And the biggest question mark coming in, I think, was the defensive line, because you had, again, Oduma and Julian and Max and Dylan. Those are guys who are juniors. Right now they're seniors, and so they've been in the system. They played a pretty consistent, but the ones that were totally replaced were the defensive lines. You got a brand new front 3. Some of those guys didn't get a lot of reps last year. Some did.
Right.
But like we said earlier, when you can take up double teams, you're freeing the linebackers. And to me, that's really the key for especially when you run a 3-4 defense. Like when you've got only 3 down linemen, if they don't take up double teams, it's going to be up into the backers and people are going to be running on you. But when you demand respect, you demand a double team, you demand those kind of things, you maybe a tight end tackle, like you play that rather than chipping him off and out running a seam route consistently. You really can see a defense play well. So I'm not overly surprised, but definitely I had some questions coming in. How well can this defensive front do replacing everybody?
Okay. Are there any flaws that you see currently with our team?
Ooh, flaws. Putting him on the spot. I think, and this is a pretty obvious one, Hunter, there's some question marks in special teams.
Yeah.
We've seen some sporadic punting, as well as some of the snaps on both punt team and it's not just those kids. That comes down to, you think of extra point where you've got guys coming through and making a couple blocks. That can be a mentality sometimes. Is there are issues here? And so that you lose focus on the particular job that you're doing. Special teams can be a head game quite a bit. It's a very fine skill to do, and if you think it's easy, I would challenge you to go in your backyard and try to punt a ball. Yeah, try to punt a ball 40 yards and see how you get. And if you can, you may snap one like, oh, I did it, but try to do that consistently.
And with people rushing.
And then now you add people rushing. Yeah, and the same thing with snapping the ball. Well, I can snap the ball 10 yards. Well, okay, put someone on. You got a job down the field, and you're and so it's tough. And so I think special teams is something we need to address. I think we'll be okay a week like this coming into Southside. You got a little bit more wiggle room. I was kind of surprised it didn't bite us against Dwanger. I thought that was a team where if we made those kind of mistakes, we could be pretty vulnerable, but we kind of got away with it a little bit. But when we're talking sectional and regional time, those have got to be consistently set and fixed. And so I don't know if that's a personnel issue or a schematic thing. I do know it's being dealt with.
All right. So coming in as this week's homecoming week, if you guys do not know, how do you deal with the homecoming week and then the game and not getting distracted on Friday?
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough to be able to be focused because if you've got guys at homecoming court, they'll be out of the locker room and into halftime, and really, and I don't want to be disparaging here. You really kind of have a good opponent with Southside. Southside is it doesn't have a win, not undefeated. They're the opposite, right?
Yeah.
They are defeated.
The opposite.
They haven't had a win yet. They've been beaten by some teams like Northrop, and so you kind of know coming into this that it's an opponent where you want to be mentally tough, but at the same time, you may see a running clock pretty early. Now, I think this is a much different issue if you've got a Homestead Dwanger coming in on homecoming, because this year, and Southside has had its ups and downs, but you're just, so I don't know if this week it's as big of a deal, but senior night was done earlier. Those are always distractions. Now, senior night's a little bit better because it's at the beginning
of the game,
and then you can come and you can get refocused in the locker room, but that halftime feel makes it disjointed if you're on the court anyways. And halftime is going to take a touch longer because of homecoming festivities. It's always, the hype is always great.
Yeah.
And so for that part of it, you kind of wish that it was next week with Homestead, getting hyped, getting pumped all week. It's a dress-up day. It's a this, it's a that. The only issue for me coming into homecoming is that halftime, is the pull away, is the distraction of that. But like I said this week, I don't know if that'll be an issue against it. Those gentlemen who are on the court, they may not even be playing in the second half, depending on what the score is.
Happening. So how do you think the corner and the defensive backs have played this year, early in the season, or about halfway through?
It kind of depends on the game because sometimes you look at the Snyder game, for example. There was a drive in particular I remember where it was just running those hitch routes, hitch route, 5-yard catch, and just kind of marching down the field. And I don't think that was poor coverage. I don't think that was bad schematically. Again, the defense is built to bend, don't break.
Right.
In that case, Snyder has athletes. Northside has athletes. You keep them in front of you, and you tackle in space. May in the stand, you may like, cover, Pratt, what are you doing? You know it's coming. But you have to think big pictures. Okay, if now those corners are up and pressing and they get beat deep, they're toast.
Right.
We saw last week against Dwanger, they had some just crazy speed at wide receiver. And so you have to understand it's bigger than just giving up those 5-yard chunks.
Right.
You're going to take that all day compared to a 35-yard touchdown
over
pass.
the middle.
So I think they played really well. I think it's a tough position because if you're a linebacker and you mess up, maybe it's 4 yards instead of 1 yard
Right.
in a game. But if you're a defensive back,
It's like 70 to the end zone.
yes, it's much bigger. It's a more egregious mistake, I suppose that you could say. And so I think pretty consistently they've been really great. They've been tested against Snyder, been tested against Dwanger. Dwanger was, trips and twin,
Right.
empty quite a bit. Northside in particular. I think we'll really see against Homestead. I think that'll be the final test. Homestead is pretty good at scheming, and if they see any weaknesses, they're going to target them. And there's nothing to me that stands out as a weakness in the secondary. We've seen a lot of great play. In particular, last week we saw a lot of the deep routes double covered. The safeties moving, safeties adjusting. You saw a lot of it. It can get a little physical. I know we had a couple PIs, but in high school it's 15-yard and not a spot foul. So it's like, you don't like that, but
Better than
better than
30 down the middle.
Yeah.
Touchdown. So I feel like the offensive line has played decently this year. How do you feel they played?
Without having gone back and watching film, it's kind of tough to tell. I don't, because Jimmy and Mr. Starks, they're both really elusive. And so if you have a less mobile quarterback and running back, it's tougher to tell how those are. And to schematically, when you have the shotgun rather than under center. So it's just tough to tell. That's not something that that I would could have a grade on.
Right off the top.
Right off the top of my head. Yeah, and again, it kind of comes down game to game. I do think they picked up blitzes pretty well against Dwanger. I know Dwanger gave some exotic looks, some twists, some stunts, some things like that. And Dwanger too was a weird defense. It's I think they ran a 3-3-5. If I'm not mistaken, so that's tough. Where's the blitz coming from? Who's the backer? Those kind of things. So that gets tough. But overall, acceptable. I don't know if I would say exceptional.
But
Passing, yeah. We'll wait to Homestead and see how they do there. We've been able to score when we need to score. And perhaps the time will tell when we get into sectionals. And we see big schools, Penn and Elkhart, and then later on the LaPorte area, up into the region. We start to see some legit big schools, and we'll see from there.
So who do you think our biggest test has been this season?
Definitely Snyder.
Definitely
Snyder, and I think that's a mental as well as a physically pounding game. So it was a little bit. There wasn't quite the edge this year. That was the first game at home. That was the orange out for Owen, and so there wasn't quite that ferocity. There was more of a friendly camaraderie, I suppose, which is fantastic, man. I wouldn't have changed that.
Snyder did a great job.
They did. You just all kinds of shout outs to the Snyder team and faithful, and but that's a game that can get chippy and can test your mental focus. But no, I think the way that we responded in that game, it wasn't easy. It was a tough game. I think to me that was the biggest challenge. Dwanger, I think maybe I would have rated that a little bit higher had the quarterback not gotten hurt so early.
Right.
That to me is really unfortunate. He got hurt, and he would have loved to have seen how does that game happen. It was 13-0, and it's tough to tell. So had he been healthy the whole time, that could have been. Northside was the most persistent challenge.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't go away. But at the same time, Northside is a team that would drive, and then you'd have a 15-5 and a 10-yard penalty, and they'd back themselves up. So I would have to say Snyder, followed closely by Northside, and then Dwanger.
So how do you feel the discipline of our team has been this year with all the external situations and stuff going on?
I think it's been really great. I think we've had, I'm trying to remember, I just remember a couple 15-yarders that we shouldn't have had. But again, you're dealing with 17, 18-year-old boys who aren't always a decision maker. So overall, it's been pretty good. I think discipline-wise, the only thing that stands out to me would be the special teams
Yeah.
because that's a mental discipline. I think people, every year you see NFL, you see college teams busting coverages or missing assignments and things, but overall it's been very, very impressive.
So once we get to sectionals this year,
Okay.
they realigned the sectionals,
They have.
correct?
They
So who is in our sectional this year, and who's going to be our biggest threat?
So big school wise, you're talking Warsaw, Penn, and I believe Elkhart.
Okay.
I don't think it's Elkhart Central because all those schools, if I'm not mistaken, have
Merged.
combined.
Yep.
I don't know much about those northern schools. I do know that Warsaw is beating, they beat Plymouth 77-0, and then I can't remember who their first game was, but they pounded a couple teams. They did lose to Northwood, but Snyder is tough because Snyder's an offense. It's a system, right? And so you're going to see against Snyder, you're going to see 2 tight ends, wing backs, and then lots of options in the backfield. And last year we did really well against Warsaw. We got up early. We made them try to pass it. We got them out of their rhythm. They've got a great coaching staff, but I would think that once you get the Warsaw system figured out, and the tough part is it runs counter to all of the other
Offenses that we play.
Yeah, but also all of the other rules. Like if you're a defensive lineman, there's a lot of things that change, which is why it's kind of gimmicky.
Yeah.
No one else runs. I like to call it the phone booth. Everything's done nice and tight into a phone booth. It's not going to be successful at a college, but against high school teams, you can be moderately successful. It's not something they're going to get to state with.
Right.
But it's what they run, and they run it pretty well. And so I have confidence, especially with this defense, that Warsaw would be a challenge. But again, you don't know if you're going to get them right away. So I wouldn't look to Warsaw and think that is like a Hamilton Southeastern or a one of those like a Warren, something like that. That is an insurmountable team. Challenging, yes, but I wouldn't say it's our biggest concern. I would look to the unknowns of a Penn. Penn is a huge high school, typically pretty solid at football, so I would look to Penn, and I just don't know much about Elkhart. So put my ranking 1A Penn, 1-2 Elkhart / Warsaw.
All right. So how do we think the receivers have played this year?
Oh my goodness, they've been fantastic.
Yeah.
They've been fantastic. It feels like most of the things. You've seen some great catches. Jaden Hill's done a nice job. The Rudolph kid has done a great job. Hafner, right?
Yep.
Hafner's done a great job. Number 4, right?
7. Hirschberger's.
Hirschberger, that's the other H I was thinking of. And so those kids have really played well. You feel like anytime the ball is close, it's caught, which is exceptional in high school football, which has really made Jimmy Sullivan's transition to Carroll a lot smoother.
Yeah.
And you saw a difference when the second string, third string came in. There's a lot of drops. There's a lot of misses. A lot of and so you just appreciate the maturity of those kids that are starting. That to me next year. I know defensively you lose all of those guys, but linebacker wise, there's some dudes coming up that can fill those gaps. But wide receiver wise, that will probably be our biggest deficiency. Is what are those replacements going to look like next year? So they've been really great.
So you touched on Jimmy, and he came from Homestead. If he didn't come over, he'd be sitting behind Slavin this year, correct?
Well, I don't think so. I think when you look at when you compare their production numbers, my guess is he would be starting.
Okay.
And, I think that's quarterback competition that would have eventually taken place, and I think that's one he would have won. And we've seen that through the numbers, right?
Yeah.
His numbers are just a lot better than what we see out of the starter at Homestead right now.
So when the backups have gotten into the game,
Sure.
do you see anything? Do you see potential in the backups, or do
Sure.
you
I mean,
just
it's
not have
tough.
a threat
It's
to
tough to tell because sometimes teams will leave their you get a running clock or something. You toss your backups in. You will still be seeing the ones of another
on the
team,
defense, right?
and so that gets hard. Ones versus twos is always you challenge your size and experience, and even having several plays under your belt when you come in, you're a little bit hyped up, and you're not as focused as if you've got a couple plays that you've run already. I think there's a lot of potential. I think at linebacker in particular, I think so. I think there's a lot of depth there. You've got Cam Wentz, who's coming up again. Will Jeffries, who's a sophomore. So I think it's a little bit tough to tell, but defensively, you've seen some guys who are technically second string who've come in and gotten a lot of playing time that have been pretty solid.
Yeah.
Brody Beeks, I think at nose
Yep.
has gotten, and that's a sophomore. He's a big dude. Played pretty well. So there are some that stand out. Others, like we said, kind of mop up time on offense. It's tough, especially, we just banging on the backup wide receivers a little bit. It's hard to get back into your rhythm and on the field, and you've been standing for a half, and you're not warmed up. And so that's tough to get the legs loose and run the routes, and what's the defense given. So maybe that's not a fair assessment, but definitely those others have stood out.
So what is what's the key to victory going down the stretch here for the Chargers if you want to make a deep playoff push?
That's a good question. I think in high school football, in particular, it comes down to matchups. Each week is going to be a little bit different. When you see again Warsaw running kind of a unique offense, it just depends on what the strengths are. And so in football, there's not necessarily any particular. I think basketball's a little bit different. You got your system, you run your system.
Right.
Maybe you can change it up a little bit. But football, it's matchup based. What are their strengths? What are ours? What are we going to take away? Defensively, is this a team that runs the ball like Warsaw runs the ball really well? You're going to press. You're going to move up. You're not going to respect necessarily the wide receivers like what you would against the north side. So keys to victory, I think down the stretch we are going to have to rely on our defense.
Yep.
Because I think the offensive line will be tested. And if there's any question mark, that's where it's going to be, is how is the offensive line going to play in the tournament. So I would say relying on defense for a deep run.
So we have been tested in a couple shootouts.
Okay.
So how do you think we've played in those shootouts?
One of the things that impressed me the most in I'll point to the north side game, was the consistency with which we continued to kind of push back.
Yeah.
Challenged, and they drive down the field, and then the defense held tough, penalty, back up. And then you kind of the ebb and flow of that. And in high school, you can see sometimes where people will get mentally challenged or fatigued. You're out there. I think at the north side game, you're talking about 80-plus plays. The defense is out there. And if you include special teams and, with the who am I thinking here? With Dylan and with he's in class. Why can't I Braden Steely? Yeah, the Steely eluded me. Those guys are playing offense too. You're talking 90-plus plays. That to me was impressive. The physical fitness of those kids. They played a really, really nice job in those games. So shootout wise, I would say that's the one in particular that stands. Snyder's different. It was an emotional high. Northside too, sometimes you can kind of overlook because they're just a little bit of a little brother feel, like, oh, you're close to us and you always want to beat us, but you put your hand out and hold your little brother away and he can't swing and hit you. Well, this time little brother was a very good football team. Northside looked really great. They took advantage of the guys they have on their roster. And they played really well. That to me was a team. I'm like, this is a really good football team.
Yeah, they're a good team.
I was impressed with Northside.
So we saw in the last game against Dwenger that our offense ran the Wildcat.
Yeah.
Do we think that has any potential going forward?
Oh, absolutely.
So Steely had, I think it was over 100 on the ground from the Wildcat.
Yeah, he and that's one of those things where they've been working on that all season.
Yeah.
But kind of waiting for the right opportunity to pull that out. I think against Dwenger it was. And I kind of held on to that until a little bit later to push them over the top.
Right.
And you thought maybe you'd hang on to that for Homestead, but Homestead's not really looking like they're going to be. You didn't need that to beat Homestead. It doesn't appear. And so you have to run it before the postseason to get a feel for it, see if it's going to work. So it's on film now. My guess is there's some plays they haven't shown, but they want to put it out there, so now you have to prep for that. It just makes another thing defensive have to get ready for, and you get your dudes the ball in space. Braden Steely may be the best athlete that we have on our team.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense to get them the ball.
Get him the ball in space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And two, it's not only in space, it's behind, he can run the edge and he can get to the outside, and you have the gosh, I can't remember what they call it. They call it the Chaos package when he and Starks are in.
Yeah.
And then there's also, they kind of run like a quad. They've got 4 in the backfield. And so that, I can't remember what they call that one. But it's just nasty. It's just a nasty, like, oh my gosh, that's tough to defend. You have Bennett, Steely, and Starks with Sullivan as quarterback. And
all 4 of them can run the ball there.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So,
we talked about. So, how do we feel about the rest of the season? Do we think there's any one game in particular that's going to mean more than the others?
Homestead. You got to beat your rival.
Yep.
You got to beat them. You got to beat them well. You got to feel. And 2, I think that sets the tone for next year as well. If you have a really great Carroll team this year and you let the Spartans hang around, that's a moral victory.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want a rival to have one of those ever. You thump them, you run it up.
Right.
Not as in like a nasty, malicious 2-point conversion every time kind of thing.
But you just keep.
But you put points on the board. You get a running clock and you let it go, and you establish your dominance in the mentality of the other teams. It's a rival. We're coming to play. We want to win.
We're not messing around.
We're not messing around. Yeah, absolutely right. So you want to come at it and you want to just establish that for the mentality of, like I said, both your team and those coming down the road on the Chargers side. So Homestead definitely. I would circle the Wayne game too.
Okay.
I'm really interested to see how we do against their running back who last week had like 432 yards and 7 touchdowns. Holy cow, that guy's a dude. He was also on ESPN's top plays because of playing Northrop, and he made like 1 million people miss.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see that game. I'm not Concordia and Wayne and Southside are not. They're at the bottom of the SAC. So it's not like you're looking for close games the rest of the way out. I mean, that's not to sound arrogant, but it's not college football where a team can come out like an App State and just surprise you. You know what you're getting with high school football, and we played enough common opponents where you
to kind of know what you're going
to kind of know what you're going to get in matchup wise, and really sometimes in high school football, just like in middle school football, Hunter, it's about Jimmies and Joes, not X's and O's, and so sometimes that's what it is, and I think in these matchups that's what it is. It's that you may have the best scheme to play a Carroll team, but it comes down to Jimmies and Joes. Who do you have on the field versus our dude on dude, and we just have those advantages.
Yeah. So going back to, I don't know if you went to the Northrop game.
I did not. No, I was not able to go to that one. I think I was headed to the Big House, Hunter.
I think you probably were.
I think that's what we were doing. Yeah.
And then there was one trick play in the game where Jimmy, it was kind of like the Philly special, where Griffin Shealy threw it to Jimmy Sullivan in the end zone, and they had a whole package off of that. Do you think that has any potential?
Yeah, and then again, I think it's a little bit like the Wildcat when you can throw those in and get a defense thinking. Sometimes that's more for down the road.
Right.
If we're thinking sectional or Homestead, or even Northrop is when Dwanger gets ready, they have to prepare for that, and so the more that you can increase the play, I mean, it's kind of a balance because you don't want to show too much too early.
Right.
Because some of those packages you don't want them ready for, but then you also want to make the defense. Well, they do this. Okay, we got a scheme for that. We got to put that in, and it takes away from the things that you really need to prep for.
So it's like a mix of opening the playbook and running a very vanilla offense.
Yeah,
because you don't want to really be on either end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, and so I think perhaps Carroll has given out the last major chunk of the playbook with that Wildcat Chaos package. Now within that, you don't know what kind of route combinations and plays that they have. But my guess is by this time you got to have it all out. You've got to play with it a little bit. You can't just
throw it out on the field.
You can't just throw it out on the field and say, "Hey, let's see if this works." And you got to have in safe settings. You've got to be able to practice it against live fire, as they say. And how does it work? What works? Can we do this in a crunch time? Does it actually happen? So I think we'll see more of that against Homestead. I don't know if we're going to see the Wildcat Chaos against Southside, but definitely I think against Homestead we're going to see it brought out again.
So do we want to go ahead and transition over to wrestling? And
wrestling.
A little bit of a prep for the season.
Sure, yeah, we can talk a little wrestling this year, sure.
All right, so I'm going to let you go ahead and just talk about what you're looking for to start your season.
Oh, man,
And
I love
when does
wrestling
your season
season.
start?
Wrestling season is fantastic, man. It starts at the end of October. Girls wrestling call-out was pretty successful. Had a lot of interest in that. Girls season practice starts October 17th. Boys
Okay.
starts then 2 weeks later. We start matches in mid-November. Got a great turnout this year. Got 22 freshmen coming out for the
pretty
squad
good.
this year. Got a bunch of sophomores. So yeah, we kind of got hit like when COVID came around. It was tough, especially for wrestling. It's inside, it's close contact.
Right.
A lot of people were real skittish of getting on the mat during that, and so that's your junior, senior class. Our numbers were partly because of that. And we're seeing just that build back up. The middle school teams are looking great. We got some great coaches in the middle school. Club numbers, we had, goodness, I think I coach little kids. So you're talking like 5-year-olds and under. And we had 60, 70 of those.
That's good.
So we had over 100 kids at our club with the other sections that we do. That stuff starts in January. We'll have sign-ups for that. No, it's just exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
So how many do you have total this year?
That's tough to tell. We have 50-plus signed up.
Signed up. You'll see how many actually
Yeah, I
show
see you'll
up.
come out. We could get some extras. Could lose some. Had the 10, 15 girls come
Not
out.
bad.
So you're talking 60, something like that, 60, 70 maybe.
So what's the sweet spot number that you're trying to get?
Sweet spot, boy, that's tough. I don't know. I've had teams before of 70. I've had teams when I was at Manchester of 30-some. It just kind of depends. I think we want to shoot for that 50, 60 number of guys and then 20-some girls.
Yeah.
So
So some of the people might be confused. Can you explain how the wrestling scoring works for the team?
team-wise, each individual, so if you get a pin, that's 16 points. If you get a tech fall, which is you win by 15 or more points, they hit 15, stop the match.
Okay.
That is 5 team points. If you win by major decision, which is 8 to 14 points, you get 14 points, and if you just win, you get 3.
Okay.
So 14 weight classes, you tally your points from there, and the team with the most points at the end wins.
So is it usually one team versus one team, or do you have invitationals too?
You have the invitationals, and so a team tournament. So if you come and it's not a team on team, that's a dual meet.
Okay.
Just like in basketball, it's a
Right.
dual. It's just a single competition game,
versus B.
match. A versus B. Yes. So there are team tournaments, but if you go to an individual tournament, you'll get points for pins.
Okay.
So the points are a little bit different. You can get. If you get just a normal victory, sometimes it's 1.5. You get a major, it's 2. You get a tech, it's 2.5, and a pin is 3 points.
Okay.
So you get points for your win, but you also get advancement points.
Right.
So if you advance to the championship match, you get X. Maybe you get 10 total points, and then you can get 15 if you get first.
Right.
So you could get 15 points for winning, plus all of the points, pin or
Leading up to
regulars,
that.
leading up to that. So if you have, let's say you have 4 rounds, you've got 3, 6, 9, 12, and plus you get another 15 for getting first place, you're talking a kid could score 27 points.
Yeah.
And so you'll see sometimes there's sectionals. I was actually on the Columbia City team in high school who has the highest point total in a sectional. We had over 200 points.
That's impressive.
At a Carroll. So I was at Columbia City, and we wrestled here at Carroll. We had the highest. We had all of our wrestlers, all 14, in the sectional championship match that year. Yeah, so that was. I don't think anybody's come close to touching that kind of a victory margin.
So how does the varsity work? How many can you wrestle varsity?
14.
14.
Mm-hmm. This year we should have enough for a varsity A, varsity B. So we'll have a team that goes in and wrestles a little bit of higher competition, and then the varsity B will be technically our kind of JV level, but they'll be wrestling other varsity squads. So maybe like I think to my days out in Wabash County, like a Manchester or Wabash and Northfield, those teams that are still varsity, but they're not your
Upper echelon.
Well, even bigger schools, like not like your Penn or your Perry Meridian, they're wrestling teams that, like a Northside, they're a bigger school. However, they're not a traditional powerhouse school. So we'll put those out there, wrestling varsity kids, but just not the leveled up like what the varsity A will be.
Right. So if you have 14 varsity and then 14 varsity B, do the rest just wrestle JV?
Mm-hmm. Yep. A lot of Saturdays we'll go to a varsity A, varsity B, and a JV meet. JV meets are typically match it up as you go.
Yeah.
So you may, like we go to Goshen and you've got weight classes. Sometimes you'll have 8 guys, maybe you'll have 4. Sometimes you'll have 2 groups of 6. It's just get 3 to 4 matches in if you can and go from there. They're a little bit more loose in structure than what, like at DeKalb, we just go up and we match them up. Who's where, who's, if it's kind of close in weight, it's early on in the season.
Yeah.
Maybe a kid is, instead of 195, they're 195.6. Toss them in with the 190. It's just about getting matches, about getting competition.
Right. So anything else you want people to know about wrestling season or what's coming up?
That's exciting. It's a little bit tough to get into at first because of the points and the scoring and near fall and those kind of things. But it's one of those things where it's a little bit different than football. If you're down 35 points and the clock's running in football, you probably can't win. But in wrestling, there's always that chance where you can
come back,
hit a move, come back, get a pin at the very end. We've got overtime. Which leads to then sudden victory. It's a really exciting sport, and it's incredibly hard. I think people underestimate how hard that is. I think it's a little bit like swimming. With swimming, you think it seems pretty easy until you get in and do it, right? Yeah, so you add that in there. I think it's always a misnomer, too, about the weight cutting thing. That's a personal issue that I have that people assume. Because, in the past, our sport has historically been kind of pegged for doing some things that feel a little suspect. But today, we have a hydration test at the beginning of the season and a body fat analysis. And it spits out, it says, hey, you can only, drop 1.5 or 1 pound per week. Yeah, and by the end of the season, here's your limit. And there are so many rules and restrictions on all of those things that you record your weigh-ins and you submit it to the state, and do they count, do they not count? So it's very regulated and controlled, and there's not a lot of times where we say, hey, why don't you lose 20 pounds? You just don't do that anymore. Where are you? Oh, yeah, I'm 152. Okay, well, wrestle. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. We're not a big advocate of cutting a ton of weight. If you're close, that's a different story. Right. But it's not the starve yourself kind of thing, or it's not. It's very, very different from what most people think
of it.
Yes.
So how do playoffs work?
Playoffs.
Once you get to sectional.
Sure, sectional. It's an individual tournament.
Okay.
And so a kid we had Jared Landez go down and place in state last year, top 8 in state. He went individually. Team-wise, so the first, they will keep a team score the entire way through, which is the same way as what we just talked about. So Jared scored points for advancing and for winning. So we had a certain kind of a rank down at the state meet. It gets a little different. If you have 4 or 5 studs, and let's say the other 6 or 8 kids are not very good, you can still win a sectional. You can still win a regional with a course. So it's a little. We used to have a team tournament but that got a little cumbersome towards the end of the season. So that's actually held in December. It's an invitation. They invite teams in that have. It's a funny way that they do it. But anyways, and so sectionals and regionals, I think, are indicative of who the best teams are. Okay. But when you get to semi-state, that's tough. Yeah. Because I've seen teams before who have 2 kids that win semi-state and they win the tournament. Like, we would have beaten you in a dual meet. So semi-state's tough. But I think sectional and regional, when you see point-wise, that's the better team.
So is there anything else you want people to know about wrestling and or football?
I think we're good.
All right.
This has been good, Hunter. 40 minutes? I don't know. It's a long podcast.
It's a long podcast.